We're live. All right, welcome to the Fear Theory podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my two colleagues, John Easton and Adam Belmar, in honor of the opening of The Last Jedi. This will be the last Fear Theory podcast of the year.
That is correct.
Sadly.
A little Star Wars action
Still
behind us.
Star Wars action. Before we start on the political topics, let's talk a little bit about Star Wars. John Easton, who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Favorite Star, of course, I have to bifurcate this slightly. Of Star Wars of old, which, of course, we all love, especially those of us of our generation. It's got to be Darth Vader and Han Solo. I think those were just fantastic characters. And then today in this new trilogy, I just flat out love the lead, Rey. I think she's a fantastic lead.
Pro Rey.
Yeah, no, I'm very pro Rey, but I'm a Luke Skywalker fave if I had to pick one.
I will say that when I was growing up, I had a huge crush on Princess Leia. I mean, it didn't really end up that well, but loved her. I was in love with her for many years. And, of course, the Alec Guinness character,
Absolutely.
I mean, Obi-Wan, you got to love Obi-Wan. I am excited to see The Last Jedi. But I'm not sure if I'm going to see it.
Well, let's be clear to all of our audience, including the McGuins. We've not seen it. There will be no spoilers.
No, and Adam, you want to do a quick Obi-Wan imitation?
An Obi-Wan?
Yeah.
Yes. About the tax cuts.
Oh, these are not the tax cuts you're looking for.
All right, 31, no more. Roy Moore lost to Doug Jones in a bid to replace Jeff Sessions as Alabama's junior senator. Moore was the worst candidate in history. Almost every establishment Republican voiced either deep concerns or outright opposition to him, except for the president, Donald Trump, and Steve Bannon. And yet, he still lost by only 1 point. My theory, this election was a wake-up call to the grand old party. You can't nominate terrible candidates and expect to win even in deep red states. John Easton, am I correct? Was Roy Moore the worst political candidate in history?
That is quite a statement, and I applaud you for that statement. I'm not sure if he is or not, but I'll tell you that if there's one truism in United States politics, local, state, federal, it is that candidates really, really matter. They matter the most. Yes, opposition research matters. Yes, fundraising matters. But if you don't have a solid candidate, it could spell trouble. And I think that the Democrats knew that their only shot to win this thing would be if Roy Moore was the general election candidate. And it wasn't that long ago, actually 2012, when Senator McCaskill, brilliantly aided Todd Akin in Todd Akin's Republican primary, because they knew that this was a candidate very flawed, lots of baggage, and would have a tremendous amount of trouble in the general election. They ran $1.7 million worth of ads for him, and they back-channeled support to his campaign as well. He wins the primary, and he gets crushed by McCaskill in the general. This is the state of Missouri. And I believe that there were a lot of elements of this, not that the Democrats aided Roy Moore, but Roy Moore was probably the worst candidate to come out of that primary. He had too much baggage. He had too much baggage before the sexual allegations came out. Then that was the tipping point.
I would say that I think that the Republicans made a tremendous mistake by destroying first Mo Brooks, because they thought that if Roy Moore was such a toxic candidate, such a huge mistake, such a terrible, terrible human being, even before all the sexual allegation stuff came up, that they would have a harder time beating Mo Brooks in a one-on-one against Luther Strange than Roy Moore, but that kind of backfired against him. I think Mo Brooks would have, even though he was much more conservative, he would have beaten Doug Jones. What did you think, Adam Belmar, about how this all played out?
Well, I just agree with both of you, and I think the defining factor was when young children were brought into this. This was just beyond the pale, and even though folks in Alabama decided in large numbers to come out and continue to support Judge Moore, even though it wasn't quite enough, it led me to believe that the president has a real serious problem that he needs to contend with in all of this. he is energizing the Democrats as much, maybe even more than the Republican base. And this was a deeply flawed candidate, but this one will chalk up to personality and lack of honorable conduct on the part of the candidate. But I think it portends very difficult things for the president for a strategy for 18, John.
I'm not sure about that. We'll see about it. I mean, I would say that outside of Roy Moore, who's the biggest loser in this, John?
I have to think that the White House is a pretty big loser in this, and I say that, and I agree with what Adam is saying. It's just, you feel like there's a real lack of deep strategy here. Yes, he supported Luther Strange, but you could tell his heart wasn't in it. Talking about President Trump here, and then once Roy Moore won, it was almost like, yeah, this was the kind of the guy I wanted in the first place. And then you have this coming into, Roy Moore loses by a point the other day, and now it's, well, I did support Luther Strange. So they're all over the map, and I just feel like there wasn't any deep strategy to deal with this, working closely with the leaders both in Alabama and in Washington to really get this right. I think they're a loser in this.
Yeah, I think that Steve Bannon is the big loser, and the reason I say that is because Bannon went all in during the primary, which Trump didn't do, and Bannon has to now go to funders and say, listen, I still have a strategy, even though I lost in Alabama, a Republican seat, which hasn't been done very often, to a pro-choice Democrat who is actually fairly liberal on lots of issues.
Did you guys hear what Bannon came out and said right after
He blamed Mr. McConnell, didn't he?
Well, a little bit, but what he also did, which I thought was very interesting, was that he chalked it up to Democratic strategy and the power of the DNC and others to come in, as he called it. I don't know how he could fathom this as under the radar, but Democrats were playing very big in rallying the base and getting the vote out. The former president and vice president taped robocalls. There was a lot of national political action on the Democratic side to get folks, especially African American voters, maybe those who were voting for the first time or never would have come out in a special election. They came out in force, and that was not just because of Moore, it was because others helped to organize and get out that vote.
Yeah, I would say they came out, but the real difference was in the suburbs. Women turned against Roy Moore big time.
Even those Republican women, right?
Suburban Republican women.
Yeah.
And then the big difference was about the 12 to 20,000, I guess, write-ins votes. That was kind of the difference in the 1%. That Richard Shelby, the senior senator from Alabama, former Democrat, but Republican, he said, I'm voting for a write-in. And I think that write-in thing was
pulled away the votes.
I think that pulled away the votes.
Well, and Shelby, he's got a lot of pull. He's a big factor there. But I think back to the point about the White House is that, remember something. I mean, Steve Bannon is not a party leader. He's a fringe leader, you could say, or he'll throw out ideas. He'll move on to the next state. He'll throw support to somebody. He'll move on to the next state. The thing that was missing in this was that President Trump and Leader McConnell were not on the same page with this, and I think that was very detrimental to this Alabama election. And I hope that is not repeated in 2018. I mean, you've got a guy like Roger Wicker, who's on the ballot, a very solid senator, a guy who is a perfect fit for his state, who is, very much with Trump, very much, a guy who supports conservative legislation on a very regular basis, very high conservative, rating. And if people aren't together on this thing, he could be in jeopardy.
Yeah, I would. Let me say this. I think that, and I wrote this in my blog, I don't think that Trump had much of a choice. I don't think that he could have said, you know what, I'm going to not back the Republican candidate just because I think he's a bad candidate, because a lot of people thought that Donald Trump was a bad candidate, and he ended up winning. I think that Trump had to support the process. He also didn't want to alienate a big part of his political base that really liked Roy Moore. I also don't think he was all that enthusiastic. I mean, he went and did some calls. He went down. He campaigned in Pensacola, which is actually not in Alabama. I don't know if you can. I mean, you blame Trump. I get that. I think that Trump did follow the McConnell strategy of backing Luther Strange, and that didn't work out. So hopefully what we learn from this is that you got to back the incumbents who are going to win. But if they don't win, you got to get a better alternative, because Roy Moore was just a very bad alternative.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said there, except to say that, the president was rather pragmatic, I think, and he shared this with most anyone who would listen. We need the seat. We need the seat. You know what? They need the seat right now. And so we've got this, are they on the same page? What are the political realities of the next 10 days right here in Washington before Jones ever gets to D.C.?
Yeah, and John, let me ask you this, looking further at the implications of governance in the Senate, you being an old Senate hand, will this complicate things for McConnell in trying to get the votes? Does this make Susan Collins much more powerful in negotiation? Or is one additional vote not matter, given the fact that it's only one more vote and they have a slight majority anyway?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's been written about a fair amount. Okay, what does this do? 52 to 48 to now 51-49. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Yeah, does it empower those who really want to, grab their pitchfork and say, I'm not voting for this unless I get X, Y, and Z? Yeah, of course it does. But it was already happening at 52-48.
Yeah.
So it's all about the caucus really coming together on the big important stuff, the stuff that philosophically binds them. That is still the case, and that is going to carry the day. I think that's going to carry the day on the tax cuts, which is, of course, imminent. But no, I don't. I think it matters on the edges, but not a big difference.
And I think you can make the case that this actually might help McConnell by bringing moderates back in the fold. If you had Roy Moore there and he was holding out and defining what the right was way to the right, it would have made it much more difficult to get any kind of agreements with the Democrats. I think now the reality is that they've got to cut deals with Democrats. They might next year do something like welfare reform, which they'll do the reconciliation. But all the other routine stuff, they have to get 60 votes. Adam.
No, 100% agreed. And I fear that while the majority, even though it is a very, very slim majority, still exists, that the Republican Party is so focused on fighting with itself and so unable to get unanimity and move things forward that if they can get tax reform, great. You're right. You've written about this. The president gets a win finally legislatively. You've pointed out that Gorsuch was obviously a very important win for the Republicans at the beginning of the year, but it's not enough for the American people to chew on and say, yeah, I really think we're moving in the right direction. They're going to blow this because they can't get on the same page. That worries me greatly. And I'm not necessarily saying no confidence in Senator McConnell's leadership at all, but people need to come together and try and figure out what it is to be a majority that can lead.
Well, that's the last point I would make, is that if there's one thing that we do know now after Virginia and Alabama, if the Republicans don't get some solid accomplishments starting with tax cuts, hopefully getting some sort of DACA deal, hopefully some sort of increase in defense spending and other things, they don't get those accomplishments on the table, they are really screwed in 2018.
Yeah, I think that's right. And remember, you're talking about negotiating with Democrats. They're already talking about maybe using the same tool that they used for repealing Obamacare and for these tax cuts called reconciliation in the next budget to do some welfare reform or entitlement reform. If that is the case, you can almost guarantee that, especially on entitlement reform, that Democrats are gone. So, that is a shrewd tactic, but it is also one that is very partisan.
Theory 2, early exit. Will Paul Ryan retire from Congress after the 2018 elections? That was the gossip flowing from a widely read Politico article yesterday and featured prominently on the Drudge Report. My theory, lame ducks make bad leaders. Paul Ryan is not going to leave his position as Speaker unless he is forced to by either his colleagues or by the 2018 voters, election and voters, whatever I'm trying to say. It's all just a bunch of gossip. John Easton, is it all a bunch of gossip?
Well, first, I want to point out that that it's not good to disparage ducks. And the University of Oregon has the greatest mascot in all the land. So we'll start with that. But
Are the University of Oregon, are they lame ducks?
never.
Well, you know what?
Lame
Since it's our
ducks.
last one of the year, can I just pause for those of you who are watching and looking over our shoulders? This is the point of the movie where it has my very favorite line. Uncle Owen, I was going to Toshi Station to pick up some power converters. All right, go ahead. Continue.
Well, I think that story was thorough for sure. I mean, the reporters talked to a lot of sources there, but you've got Paul Ryan, who is on the brink of a very big achievement that we'll share credit with, of course, President Trump and Mitch McConnell, but very big achievement, and I just cannot see that he would now just write off in the sense that I can see him doing it after 2018, but what he has right now, I think, is this boost. I mean, his political capital will be probably no greater than coming into January of 2018. So if he's serious about some of these things like welfare reform, maybe infrastructure, which would be fabulous for the Republican Party going into the midterms, but I think that unless he is going imminently, he is departing, and I am with you. You don't just telegraph what you're going to do a year from now and then completely neuter your power.
Wouldn't it be great if one of us had been the spokesman for a Speaker of the House?
Oh,
Wait. I mean, honestly, how do you handle these kind of things if you're the spokesman for the Speaker of the House and this comes out? What would you have been doing to tamp this down, or would you enjoy the speculation for a day and write it off as silliness?
well, I think it's important to be as vociferous as possible to deny that that's going to happen. If you're not really vociferously denying that, I mean, there are always rumors of members' imminent departure, especially if they're in leadership, especially if they don't really seem like they're enjoying their job. When I was working for Hastert, there was different thoughts about him, different rumors about him retiring throughout his 8 years as Speaker. He finally retired after he lost. They lost the majority. I worked for Bob Michael, the House Minority Leader, and there was a rumor early on that he was going to retire, and then a couple days later he announced his retirement. I remember when Harry Reid announced fairly early on that he was retiring. The problem when you announce your retirement early on, you lose all of your political capital. People don't fear you as much. They fear longevity, and if you're a short timer, you don't have any play. And I think then that's the huge problem with Paul, this story coming out.
Well, also, and the focus shifts to successor.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I thought that the best help that this whole story got in being plowed under yesterday came from the podium at the White House, where Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, in response to the question of whether the president was surprised at this news, she said, well, I think the Speaker was surprised. And she went on to say that the two men had spoken very recently, and that the Speaker had assured the president that this was not the case.
Yeah, and then let's get to that, because during the presidential election, things between Donald Trump and Paul Ryan were not that great. They seem, John Easton, to be getting a lot better. I mean, the stories are that they talk several times a day, that there's not a whole lot of miscommunication there. I'm sure that Trump didn't love the fact that Ryan tried to get him out after the famous Billy Bush tape.
Yep.
But I'm sure that Ryan doesn't particularly love the personality of Donald Trump. But they have found a good way of working together.
And you could point to one major reason above all, and that's the tax bill. I mean, the biggest piece of tax legislation in a generation, in decades, is going to bring people together like this. I mean, this has a galvanizing effect, not just for those two, but for most of those Republicans in Washington, D.C. right now. But I agree with you, and it does set 2018 in a way that maximizes the power of Paul Ryan. I mean, when I look at it, I am a Paul Ryan fan. I just think his demeanor, his background, everything, it just leads to a pretty effective leader right now. But now he's got his signature legislation. I just think that's going to really bode well for his leadership.
And I would say that one of the great things about having a president of your own party is that president deflects all the attention. And so that gives you a lot more leeway to get stuff done. Being a little less famous in that job is not necessarily a bad thing, Adam Belmar, because it gives you a lot of leeway. I mean, it's a lot easier for him, I think, to walk through airports and stuff like that. Paul Ryan does not have to be as famous as he once was. Now, sometimes I think he wants to be famous just to kind of counteract the president's tweets, but he doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct, and I don't know that since Tip O'Neill we've had a truly top tier personality.
Well, no Gingrich.
Well, okay, you're right, and he was so polarizing, and I think your point is well taken.
I'd say Nancy Pelosi as well.
Yeah,
Sorry,
let's
Adam.
rewind the tape.
Come on, Adam.
I'm watching Star Wars. I don't know about you guys, sort of cutting the show, watching Star Wars. I think that where Speaker Ryan is concerned, that he has flown a little bit lower. He doesn't do giant press events, and the most important thing to me is that tax reform and fiscal prudence is his raison d'etre. Right? This is his entire reason for being. It is why he was the chairman of Ways and Means, and this is the thing he came to do. And I think he does have all of the capital that you've spoken about. But without a good strategy for how you roll it out and working with the Senate, we could have absolutely a replay of the debacle that was the 2017 legislative agenda.
Let me ask you this. First of all, the Paul Ryan might learn a few things from Mitch McConnell about kind of taking it down a notch. You don't have to be the big rock star, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you get your legislative agenda. But, John, let's talk a little bit about welfare reform. What are they talking about with welfare reform? Are they talking about, trying to redo the war on poverty, or are they trying to just cut spending with it? Do you have any idea?
I don't, and the funny thing is I think they've been probably asked so many times about what's next, because I think reporters in this town have really started to, see the handwriting on the wall, which is this is going to pass, and I think it does in the next few days. So I think that I don't know who said it first, the president or the speaker. I can't remember who said welfare reform was going to be on the docket.
I think it was actually the Freedom Caucus put it on the docket, and then Paul Ryan, who's wanted to do something with entitlements for a while. The question is, are you talking about middle class entitlement? Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about the social safety net? I think one of the big problems you have right now is you got a huge opioid crisis. Medicaid spending is not going down; it's going up, and opioids are a big part of that. So I think that Republicans have to be careful that they don't. This is not what happened in the mid '90s. Adam Belmar, do you think it is? I mean, on welfare reform, the people who are hurting seem to need a lot more help.
Yeah, we've sort of played past the passage of tax reform in our general discussion, and I think that's right and it's appropriate. But right now we're having a fairly intense debate tangential to this. Senator Rubio is focused on the child tax credit, and we are potentially looking at another point up in the corporate tax rate in order to pay for all of this. The perception is that the tax reform, tax cut, and jobs bill has been a boon to business and to the higher brackets. I think that the president's rhetoric on the campaign trail, and he continues to focus on the lower wage brackets, but there's nothing demonstrable that's been delivered there. They are only tinkering around the edges with this bill with regard to that. I think Republicans are going to have a seriously hard time messaging without any real movement on welfare reform, and I don't think that there's will to do that in 18. This is a dog that won't hunt.
Certainly not bipartisan welfare reform. I mean, Democrats are not going to play for that. John, what do you think about this idea that it's awfully hard to, try to balance the budget on the backs of the poor when you just gave a huge tax cut to corporations?
Well, I think you nailed it. If there was some way to get some bipartisan momentum going on this or anything, I mean, I think that they've got to take a look at 2018 election and say, okay, what is doable? I mean, I think that what is discussed a lot in D.C. is about, okay, at what point are we pretty much out of time in an election year? I always feel like it's right around late spring, early summer. You're not going to get much done because members just want to go home. They want to campaign, and members don't want to work with, particularly the other side of the aisle. They want to it's just locked down. So what can get done between now and late spring, early summer that people can feel? I think infrastructure would be the perfect place to go. You would get some bipartisan buy-in, and I think that constituents would really feel it. You go into a welfare or entitlement reform, you're talking about a pretty ideological exercise that probably does not get done, and therefore you've just given up the opportunity to do something real tangible and doable in the first 6 months.
And that's exactly what they cannot do. This has got to be the art of the doable in 18.
Well, I mean, there's a couple different schools of thought on that. The one school of thought is that you want to get as many accomplishments done as possible, and to do that, you need to get some bipartisan support and get those accomplishments and bring them to the table to the voters and say, listen, this is what we've done to prove that we can govern. The other thing the other option is to exemplify and really kind of play up the differences between the two parties, to try to drive up your base and have a real kind of discussion about the base philosophies between the two parties. Do you think they're going to try to get accomplishments, or do you think they're going to try to, fan the partisan divide?
Well, if it's a sequel to 2017, they're going to not go for smaller accomplishments. They're going to keep going for big bites at the apple. And I have to think that they've learned a little something from 2017, especially Obamacare. Nobody wants to go back there again. They're certainly not going to revisit that in 2018. I'm almost sure of that, particularly under a reconciliation way. But I would think that the desire would be for some accomplishments. I mean, I don't think Donald Trump wants to sit there and merely just fire up his core supporters and McConnell and Ryan and the Congress's core support. I feel like they want to get at least one or two medium-sized bites done.
So on the scale of, let's give you this choice, Adam: infrastructure or welfare reform. Which one do you think they'll do?
Infrastructure.
John Easton.
I want them to do infrastructure.
Welfare. Theory 3, Bonum, Annus. That means good year in Latin, for those who don't speak Latin. Actually, I don't speak Latin. I wish I took Latin in high school, but I didn't. 2017 was a good year. Not a very good year, but a good year. It gets a bum rap by the pundits and by the Trump haters and by a lot of other folks. But by most economic measures, America is doing great. Here's my theory. Social media and the tweeting habits of the president give folks the mistaken impression that America is going down the tubes. But things are better, and they're getting better, and they're getting better and better all the time. Adam, was this a good year or a bad year?
I tell you what, I think I fundamentally agree with you. It was a good year. It wasn't a great year. There have been so many challenges this year, from natural disasters to dealing with the political fallout from the change in power in Washington, the election of President Trump. I do think the economy and the gains that we're making there have been an important part of why this has been a good year overall for the country. I also think that we pay such close attention, John, to the minutia and the hyperbole that everything seems so overblown and every fight is so important. And yet I think in the long view of history, we're a healthy democracy. We've got a lot of challenges, but I don't think all of those are bad things. I think they're good to recognize and realize that civil discourse and people getting involved in the process is what's needed. I'm very, very comfortable going into 2018. I have a lot of hope for these next round of elections, not necessarily because I think we're going to have great Republican gains, but because the electorate's engaged and people realize that they have to continue to be engaged. And I think we're going to have great turnout in 18 regardless of those results, and that makes me very hopeful for America. And we're going to figure out what the right thing to do is. And you know what? Socially, we seem to be getting our act together too. People are taking a hard look at what's important and what kind of values we want to have. And those are discussions that are positive, even if they're difficult.
John Easton, good year or bad year?
Well, let's start with the fact that in 2017, EFB advocacy was born.
Here we talking. We're talking now. Yes.
That in and of itself says good year. But I think that when you look at, and Adam references, when you look at the economy and how strong it has been, and you have to give this new administration, quite a bit of credit because of the way they've approached regulations, and I think businesses, small, medium, large, have felt that they felt more free to invest, more free to do more research and perhaps and hire. And I think that if we can get to the point where it's not just a great unemployment rate, because that is a very low rate right now, and it's not just consumer confidence is getting higher and higher, it's that wages are going up. That I think is going to be 2018's big sort of the mystery card. If wages start to go up, that is a massive promise of candidate Trump's that he will have delivered. Now, is it all due to him? I mean, we can debate that until way after his presidency. But if that actually starts to happen, I think that the economy at the end of 2017 will have just gotten going, just getting really revved up. So I think good from that perspective. I do, and just to finish the thought, I think that the reason why I don't think it wasn't great is because our political polarization, and I get a little tired of that term, but Adam hit on it. Everything, there's just the reaction to every political action is so dramatic. It's just exhausting. And then you have the nature of a President Trump, which is to his tweets are incendiary, and they set the news of the day, and it can explode and detract and distract, and it can be exhausting. And my one worry for this president is that there's always president fatigue. George W. Bush had it at the end of his presidency. Barack Obama even had it at the end of his presidency. And I just feel like people could be exhausted from President Trump at the end of his first term, or the end of his second year. So that I think 2017 really offered a big question for the president on that front. Can he literally exhaust the electorate?
Yeah, and I think they're already pretty tired, to be honest with you. I will say that, obviously my theory was the economy is going like gangbusters, and that makes things better. If you look at all the social indicators, they seem to be stabilizing. There's a lot less teenage pregnancy. The downside of all that is kids are on their iPhones too much, and so we're still trying to figure out how that all plays out. Crime by and large is down, but you do have these moments where some crazy person takes out a gun and shoots a lot of people, and that's I think that leads to a lot of insecurity for folks, and we haven't really come up with any kind of good way to deal with that. On the international front, there's a lot of anxiety about what's going on in North Korea, but we just kicked ISIS's ass, kicked them down. Trump promised it, and they're dead. They're gone.
Yeah, that bothers me. That worries me no end. And we haven't talked a lot about that.
But beating ISIS?
Look, there's no doubt that we've had military victories against ISIS in the heart of the caliphate. But, they're not crushed.
Oh,
they're crushed until there's an attack here or it metastasizes somewhere else. The political rhetoric around vanquishing your enemies and pulling a mission accomplished are legend. Don't fall into that trap.
Well, only a few of us have been directly involved with a mission accomplished.
Right, and I'm saying this is not for us, folks. This is a fight that will continue.
I don't think anyone's saying that.
The White House is
stupid has put a mission accomplished sign on an aircraft station.
Shut up. What I'm saying is that
who would do that?
The political leadership in the White House is far in front of where our military leaders are in their rhetoric surrounding ISIS.
Well,
and I think when we who are not involved in the military start to talk about how we kick their butts and they're done, that's the kind of vacuum for misunderstanding the threat that can be filled.
I get your point. I know. I understand your sensitivity to that, but it is a huge victory for the president who promised we crush.
And I'll grant you that.
And we did do that. North Korea has anxiety, but I think that the president, with his great relationships with Vladimir Putin, really close relationships with Vladimir Putin. That they're trying to work out the North Korea thing. That was what the phone call yesterday was all about. So on the international front, I think that finally, when it comes to trade agreements and making America the best place to do business in the world, which I think it now currently is, thanks to the Obama administration leaving, that's a real strong advantage for this. Now, there's other things. Social media, John Easton, is a real issue, and makes people very, very insecure, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's that double-edged sword. It has so many advantages. It has so many. It is become an economic driver. But on the other hand, it has, the anxiety it pulls really for parents. I mean, you've got 3 parents right here that have kids that are of device use age, and it's just there's just no great answers to really how you handle it, but also what it's done to politics. And I am one who is extremely critical of what it's done to our body politic, and I think it is obviously it is enhanced the polarization of our country politically. And so no, I count me as not a real fan of the way the social media has gone.
And the president's tweets, which are probably the worst thing that's come from this White House, don't you think, Adam Beller?
At a very high level, I have always said that I think that Twitter is a good thing, and I think the way that the president has been able to connect with the base has shown people what politics in this new age and respecting where our culture is can be. But he sometimes is irreverent and disrespectful and hurtful. So even when the First Lady's talking about bullying, we can see the bully pulpit being used not just for politics, but for mean-spirited rhetoric. That needs to tone back. All of us need to respect that. And the president is showing a bad example, I think, on that one score. But I don't want to demonize Twitter in general, because I love the fact that 3 guys can have their own Facebook Live from their own office in a business that they started in 2017 and have a conversation. And so can politicians talk to the electorate in a more streamlined, less restrictive way. There are good things, there are bad things. It's all about how we use it. Just as John Easton said, it's all about the candidates. We're probably learning a little bit about what we need to focus on when we elect folks. This president has a great agenda. I support this president, but he does a lot of things that bother me, and I know that they bother the heck out of others. And hopefully we can all learn to just tone it down a bit in 18.
John Easton.
Hashtag unlikely.
John Easton, the stock or human being or whatever trend, what's going to be the biggest winner for 2018?
The internet is going to be the greatest winner. The biggest winner because yesterday the FCC voted 3-2 to overturn the Obama administration FCC's rules on internet or net neutrality, as they call it. The Obama administration, Ted Wheeler, who was the chair of the FCC, had voted to deem the internet. Tom Wheeler had deemed the internet utility, and this was, I think, really talk about overstepping what was necessary. So what this does really is put the action yesterday. It puts the FTC back in its oversight role, which it is eminently qualified to do, as with the Department of Justice. So I think it comes back to giving the freedom of the internet where it was to begin, how it was created in the first place. So let the innovation begin. Are we doing losers now or just winners?
Do a loser.
No, you sure about that?
Biggest winner.
The biggest winner for 2018?
Yeah.
I consulted with my children. I had a feeling you might ask this question.
I would hope so. I gave you the script.
Thank you, Donna Brazil. My kids are very much in the FANG group. They believe that Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google will remain ascendant in 2018, and I think they're right. And so the Wall Street Journal did a wonderful job yesterday afternoon of characterizing what they believe, and I agree, the meaning of the FCC action on net neutrality really means, and I think in conjunction with tax cuts and the ability for companies to invest, that our technological innovation companies are going to be incredibly active and successful in redefining the marketplace in 18. They are the winners. That's where we should be. And as far as a loser is concerned, I'm just very up with people here in this Christmas season, and I have no losers.
Johnny, tell us your loser, and then I'm going to finish this podcast up. The final podcast of the year.
Oh, I got losers. Sure. No, I'm full of the Christmas spirit, but I think we're looking at 2018.
2018.
It's 2018, so I can forecast some losers. And I think it's going to be Steve Bannon and fringe candidates. I think that the solid candidates, whether they're incumbents or whether they're open seat candidates, I think the fringe candidates lose. I think Steve Bannon's proponent of such will lose as well.
The biggest loser of 2018 will be the conventional wisdom. Whatever you think is going to happen is not going to happen. And I think that in the context of what happened of the 2016 elections, in 2018, things are going to be different than what the conventional wisdom says. I like to know the guy who creates the conventional wisdom, because 9 times out of 10, they're completely wrong. The biggest winner of 2018 will be EFB advocacy. These two guys working with, helping create the image of this great firm. We are kicking ass and taking names, and 2018 is going to be a great year for EFB advocacy.
Hear, hear.
Cheers.
And I will say that welcome to the Fury Theory podcast. Thank you for joining us, and have a happy New Year and a very, very Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to all those folks who celebrate Hanukkah, including the Belmar family.
Roy Moore's lawyer. Anyone else who's celebrating Hanukkah. God bless.
God bless.